Hello again. This is Jay Kmichik, KNH 329, Module 2, Lecture 2. We are now on self-determination theory and the trans-theoretical model, two of the more popular theories models used in health behavior change. Self-determination theory, developed by a couple of professors at the University of Rochester, Ed Deasy and Richard Ryan. They've been doing this work for a long time. I've done some work using self-determination theory. Here's the basics. It's basically looking at self-authored motivation versus externally controlled, so kind of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic is for its own sake, an internal reward. You do something just for the fun of it, just because it connects with you in some way internally. Extrinsic is more of you're getting some kind of outcome from the behavior. In health promotion, typically extrinsic motivation has been used because we're telling people to do these certain behaviors because they'll get some kind of outcome, losing weight, reducing risk of disease. Not bad outcomes, but the idea is how do you get people to those outcomes. In many cases, both forms of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic, are involved in a behavior or an experience. EM, extrinsic motivation, IM, intrinsic motivation. So it's not like we're either totally intrinsically motivation or totally extrinsically motivated. It's more of kind of a combination of things, sometimes viewed on a continuum of sorts, going from extrinsic to intrinsic. There's a lot more here than meets the eye. I'm not going to give you all of the foundations of self-determination theory. But keep in mind, again, it's very rare to have kind of pure extrinsic, pure intrinsic. Now, the key is, typically, however, intrinsic tends to produce interest, excitement, confidence, which leads to better performance, more persistence, and even creativity. I'm biased, of course. I've written a book a number of years ago called The Intrinsic Exerciser. So certainly you're getting a biased perspective, but one that I think is grounded in a lot of work over the years in terms of looking at this idea of intrinsic. So for something to be perceived or experienced as intrinsic, it's got to meet innate intrinsic needs of competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So Deasy and Ryan say that these three intrinsic needs are part of who we all are. We all have a need for competence, a need for autonomy, and a need for relatedness. So what are these things? Competence is a feeling of skill. I feel like I can do something. I feel like I can shoot a basketball. I feel like I can play with my kids, right? You feel confident about certain things. Autonomy is more of a sense of choice and volition. I'm doing this because I want to. I'm doing this because I feel like I have some choice in the matter. So that's called volition, voluntarily. Refers to self-governing. Autonomous act is one done freely and willingly by the actor. And then relatedness is more of this social relations, but also relatedness with your environment. So these are the three kind of key innate needs that we all have, and in order to be intrinsically motivated, the more you can meet these needs, the more likely people will be intrinsically motivated. And the main idea here, of course, is that people need to have some intrinsic motivation. I would argue probably a lot, but at least some kind of competence, autonomy, relatedness feeling that they get when they do a health behavior, and they're likely going to do it more if that occurs. So there's support for all three basic needs would enhance motivation and possibly of setting and attaining personally relevant goals. The more intrinsically motivated you are, the more likely it is you're going to set goals that connect to who you want to be, and you're more likely to do those behaviors. So autonomy-supported approaches help people identify self-concordant or self-endorsed goals, meaning the goals aren't coming from the health promotion professional or the physician or the expert or the coach. They're coming from you. And the more the goals come from you, the more likely you are to participate in behaviors that would help you meet those goals. So what does all of this mean? Again, I'm giving you a very kind of quick introduction, quick tutorial, but use caution in how you attempt to motivate yourself, right? If you're just trying to motivate yourself to lose pounds to go on spring break, good luck with that over a long period of time, right? If you're trying to eat certain foods to lose weight, what happens when you don't lose the weight? Or where is this coming from? Is it coming from societal expectation, pressure, or is it coming something from inside what you really want to do? So I'll give you a quick example of how this intrinsic motivation works. I feel that many people are intrinsically motivated to do these behaviors, but over time, stuff happens. So I'll give you a quick story about my grandpa. He lived in this small town, Florida, New York. It's where I'm from. And he had this nice stoop. It was not just a little house, but at night, because he was a black dirt farmer, onion farmer, he would come home and sit on this back stoop. And across the road from his house that he could see was a nice playing field. And in the evening, he would love to look out, smoke a cigar, and look out into this field. And it was very peaceful and serene. And after a hard day on the black dirt, he wanted that. Well, one day, these kids came over and started playing in this field. Grandpa, being kind of a little bit grumpy, didn't really like it and started yelling at the kids. You know, they would play ball there. And again, this is years ago, so keep in mind, this is back in the day where kids actually did this. But anyway, they started playing. They were loud. They were rambunctious. He would yell across the street, and hey, be quiet. And they would say, oh, go to heck, Grandpa, old man, so on and so forth. And so he just kept screaming. Nothing worked. So one day he finally said, he walked over to the boys and across the street and said, boys, I'm sorry for yelling at you. What I'll do is I'll start giving you a quarter for every time that you come to play. And they looked at each other like, okay, this guy's crazy. Of course we'll do that. So we gave him a quarter for a couple of weeks every time, and then he walked over and after a couple of weeks said, hey, I only have a dime, but I really like you to keep coming and playing. I've changed my mind. I really like to hear the sound, the bat and the ball, your noise, and so okay, we'll take a dime. Then a couple weeks later said, hey kids, you know, I'm on a limited budget. I'm an onion farmer. I don't make a lot of money. I'll give you a nickel if you keep coming to play. And I'm like, all right, a nickel's fine. Yeah, we'll come. And then finally one day he came over. This was like after a few more weeks and said, hey kids, guess what? I can only give you a penny if you come and play, but I really would hope that you'll take the penny and keep coming over to play. And they looked at each other and then they looked at him, and the leader of the kids said, screw you, old man. We're going to go find somewhere else to play. So, the story I just told about my Grandpa K is called the overjustification hypothesis. Overjustification hypothesis. The kids started playing for its own sake. They were intrinsically motivated. My grandpa, who was a smart old man, started introducing money, right, as the reward. They started to tie the playing to the reward. When my grandpa finally started to wean them off the reward, because they had connected the play to that reward, when the reward was taken away, what happened? Decrease in intrinsic motivation, and they decided to go somewhere else. Now maybe they kept playing, maybe not, but you get the idea. They lost their intrinsic motivation to come and play at that particular field, which ultimately my grandpa was trying to get rid of them. So he figured out how to do this, and that's called the overjustification hypothesis, and that you start connecting your behavior to reward. And when you do that, you're kind of in trouble, according to the overjustification hypothesis. So that's very quick on intrinsic motivation, right? Autonomy, competence, relatedness. Be very careful about what you connect your behavior to. If it's totally connected to extrinsic all the time, you may or may not do that behavior over a long period of time. So just kind of a little tutorial on intrinsic motivation and health behavior change. And then lastly, we have the transtheoretical model. Now the way this works, it may look a little complicated here at the beginning, but it's actually quite simple. Basically, you could look at this in terms of, regular exercise, right? What is exercise? 3 to 5 times per week for 20 to 60 minutes per session. And then they ask you a question. Do you exercise regularly according to that definition? And if you answer, yes, I have for more than 6 months, or all the way down to 5, no, and I do not attend to in the next 6 months in terms of about your physical activity, for example. And you could ask this about any health behavior. And what they do, based on the answers that people give to these kinds of questions for health behaviors, they fit people into stages. Pre-contemplation, I'm not even thinking about exercising or changing my eating behavior. Contemplation, well, maybe I'm thinking about it a little bit. Preparation, you start doing it. Action, you're definitely into it. And maintenance, you've maintained that behavior over a 6-month period. So basically, they ask a question, they place you into a stage. That's why transtheoretical model is sometimes called the stages of change model. Stages of change model is also the transtheoretical model, right? So they have these stages, and the key constructs are stages, the processes of change, decisional balance, and self-efficacy. So again, Very simple in some ways, which is why practitioners and coaches have liked this model. In terms of, you ask people a question: do you intend to do this behavior? Have you been doing this behavior? And based on your response, you get plumped into these 5 different categories of pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance, right? Why is it called transtheoretical? Because it's very eclectic. It combines a variety of different theories, like decisional balance, self-efficacy theory is in there. So it's a variety of theories kind of piled and wrapped around these stages of change. What Prochaska, Dr. Prochaska, who's at the University of Rhode Island, who developed kind of this model or theory, basically has said is that behavior change unfolds through a sequence of stages. So we have to push people through these stages, right? We push them through from pre-contemplation to contemplation, or from action to maintenance. And you must move to stage paradigm. And the big word here is tailoring. So you don't give a one-size-fits-all intervention to anybody. You have to identify the stages they're in, and then the intervention matches that stage. So to get people to go from pre-contemplation to contemplation is a different kind of approach than helping people go from action to maintenance. So you try to push people with an intervention, either through self-efficacy or helping them with decisions, pros and cons. You try to get them to move through these stages, ultimately till they get to maintenance, right? People, as they go through the stages, develop more self-efficacy and confidence to go to the next stage. There's different processes in action at different stages, and people need a high level of self-efficacy to move through action to maintenance. You raise the benefits. You really try to help people see the benefits of it, and you just keep going. So some of the key words here I want to re-emphasize in terms of stages of change are, there's these 5 main stages: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, all the way up to maintenance. So that's kind of the first thing. And then there's some key constructs. There's the stages, processes of change, which we're not going to get into. Decisional balance, helping people with pros and cons. So if someone's not thinking about exercise, or they're not even thinking about changing their eating habits, you basically come in and start just kind of saying, hey, if you tried this, this might happen. So it's a very kind of rational take. You can see how the stages of change, or transtheoretical, is quite different from intrinsic in the sense, right, in that it gets a little bit beyond just doing something for its own sake. You're trying to really get people through these stages, and you're trying to really use kind of this educational model, really trying to have them think a little bit more about the pros and cons, right, of doing behaviors or moving from stage to stage. And again, this doesn't necessarily happen naturally. We do need intervention to help push people through the stages. So it's not like Piaget's, developmental, child development stages. It's not developmental, it's more intervention oriented. And the key word, and I'm going to end here shortly, the key word really is right here: tailoring. You tailor your message, or you tailor the intervention to fit the category. So the intervention, again, you give to someone who's in pre-contemplation is much different than you would give someone who's in an action stage, where they've really kind of they started doing the behavior over a period of weeks or even months, and you're trying to get them to that kind of what they might call the tipping point, that 6-month state, where typically if someone can get to a behavior change and maintain that over a period of 6 months, they typically would be labeled as someone who's in maintenance. In summary, this second lecture from Module 2 really got into self-determination theory and transtheoretical. I gave you the 3 components of intrinsic motivation: competence, autonomy, relatedness. I told you the story of my grandfather, which I made up, just so you know. And then I moved into, and that grandfather story was related to the overjustification hypothesis. And then I moved into the transtheoretical model. I realized I'm giving this to you fairly quickly. Again, you can go into the reading and read more and understand it a little bit better. But transtheoretical model and self-determination theory are 2 of the most popular, and probably will continue to be, approaches that we take to help people with motivation and health behavior change. On to managing chronic illness and pain.